Right, so the next thing we're going to do on this Kobra 2 is level and flatten the bed. So I've got a straight edge on here, and this actually is not a surprise to me because this printer out of the box was printing way better than the other printer that I had. And you can see that the bed is relatively flat for most of its surface, full contact. But back here, sure enough, there's a pretty decent sized gap. And if the camera would focus, you'd see it's probably, my goodness, probably close to 1/8 of an inch. Most of the bed, though, is pretty flat. So this machine is decent, you know. I would say this is better than most of machines that I've heard complaints about as far as bed level flatness. There's another low spot right there in the middle. And what we're going to do to solve that problem is we are going to remove the 8 bed screws here, and we're going to replace these metal spacers that you can see underneath right here with silicone. So here you can see on the left, I've got the original spacer for the 2 center screws on the heated bed. And on the right, this is the type of spacer that was used all the way around the perimeter. So the long spacer is these 2 screws, and the short one are these perimeter screws along the bed. Okay. The silicone spacers, on the other hand, are all the same length. So we want the silicone in the middle to be a little bit taller to match the length of the original spacer, so that as we're tightening the bed down, all of these spacers have the same amount of pressure. Now, the reason we're using silicone spacers is because they have the ability to warp. So we can over tighten to pull down tighter, or we can release to let it lift up a little bit more. And that's going to allow us to kind of manipulate the bed and distort it to be particularly flat. I designed these in Onshape, and they are particularly for these exact spacers that have this little recess. And if you see there, they give a little satisfying pop in, and then I got these other ones that just fill that little void because there's no need to have a recess in the spacer. So that guy just goes in there. And now with these on, you can see that our silicone spacers will match the height of the original spacers, plus about a 1/2 millimeter, if not a full millimeter, which is perfect because we're going to compress these. And so once they're compressed, they'll be the same size, if not a hair shorter. Also worth noting, when you mount these things, you have the option to put the printed spacer facing down away from the bed or up facing the bed. You want to mount it down away from the bed. Keep in mind, this bed's going to get hot. It is intended to do that. It's going to get to 60 degrees Celsius, which is, I don't know, I think it's over 100 degrees Fahrenheit, and we don't want plastic in contact with that. So make sure that when you mount them, plastic is down, and same thing here, plastic is down. Okay, so the next step to installing these spacers is to remove the bed screws, and I'm just going to loosen them to where they're no longer fastened, but I'm going to leave them in the hole. And once all of your screws are loose, you should see that you can lift up the bed plate. And I'm just going to go ahead and lift it up and pull out all of the spacers. And as you're looking under here, you can kind of see what the issue might be with some of these machines. You know, using fixed spacers like these that are made of steel means that these bars need to be perfect, these bars need to be perfect, these mounting brackets need to be perfect. Otherwise, any variations in height are going to mean that as you torque these screws down, it's going to warp and distort the plate. And I think that's what, especially for those that have big gaps in flatness in their bed, I think that mainly is the problem. Right, so we're going to use our thicker spacers in the middle here, and I'm just going to put that kind of in position. And then what I'm going to do is try and like finagle them one by one, starting in the middle with all the spacers. But I've got 2 ready to go, so we'll just put these in position, sit this down, and we'll go ahead and prep the rest of our spacers. put the spacer on the screw, and it's not going to want to stay in place, so I'm going to have to kind of lower the bed down with the spacer in place. And then what I'm going to do is try and get this one screw started. And I don't know where I'm at in the hole, so I need to get all down here so I can see what I'm doing. I'm just laying down on the ground. I've got the spacer in place. I can see the hole that I'm aiming for. And the first one's going to be the hardest. Okay, so I got it.
So now we're going to just go ahead and do that same thing for all the rest of the screws. And in retrospect, I would have started with the back middle screw if I did this again. And what you're trying to do here is just get the screws started, have them loose until all of the spacers are inserted. And then once all the spacers are inserted, you can tighten each one down to where it's, I would say firm, to where you believe the screw wouldn't back itself out under normal vibration, but you don't want it to be overly tight because you want to leave headway to compress the spacers in specific areas as you need to, as the dial indicators show you that you have high spots in the next step. So tighten all the screws down and we'll move on to the next step.
Okay, so now that the bed screws are on, the next step here is we're going to use a dial indicator. And if you've never used a dial indicator before, it's a really simple device. It just has a little probe here, and it's measuring how far that probe is being pushed in and out. And I've 3D printed this little adapter. This was off of printables, and if you just search Anycubic Kobra 2 Max dial indicator, it should come up. The thumbnail is going to be for an adapter that slides onto the rail. But if you look in the print files, there's one for mounting, replacing the back plate of your dial indicator. And I can't speak for all. This is like a $15 one on Amazon. This one fit. And when you take these 4 screws off, no worries. There's no springs or anything that are going to pop out at you. You just take the screws off, lift it off, and put the new adapter plate back on. The adapter plate's designed to snap right into the ventilation holes on the side of your print head, like that. And what we're going to do here is, with power off, lower the dial indicator onto the print bed. And we're going to lower it until we get about, I don't know, 2 or 3 spins out of the dial indicator. The amount isn't really that relevant. You could see that it raised, about 3 or 4 millimeters. The key here is that we want this probe to stay in contact with the bed plate throughout the full range of movement. So we don't want it to lift off, and we don't want it to, we don't want it too low that we don't have enough depth, or that we're putting too much spring pressure down. Too much spring pressure, I don't think that's really possible, but it potentially could start to gouge the magnetic surface here. And you can see as I'm moving this around, if I just zero the gauge out, as I'm moving this around, we've got pretty big variations in depth here. Ooh, that's a big one. And I think with the original spacers we wouldn't see so much, but we've got to dial the silicone spacers in. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to start at the center, and I don't know if this is the best way to do it or not, but I'm going to start at the center here, and I'm going to try and get my depth from here to here evened out. And you can see as I'm coming here, it's sitting higher. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this back, and I'm going to go ahead and lower the screw a little bit.
All right, so what I'm doing here is now I'm trying to take kind of a middle out approach. So I'm going to get the 2 center screws, dial it in as perfect as I can, and once I've got a 0 tolerance between those 2 screws, I'm going to work from the middle out. And all along the way, I'm just going to go from a known good position to a position that is not so good. And again, if the dial indicator shows that a rise in the bed, then I'm going to tighten that screw down. And if it shows that the bed is lower, I'm going to back that screw out. And if you do get to a point where you have a low spot, and backing that screw out feels like it's getting to be a bit too loose, like not enough tension on that screw to hold that thing down, you might want to stop there and then go back to the previous screws and just give them extra torque, and kind of restart the process. And this back right corner that I just did there was my biggest offender, and I definitely had to put more torque on other screws to get that back corner lifted up. So when you have a low spot, you want to go to the opposite end to make an adjustment, tightening that opposite end down, which will pull that low spot up. And so this is a pretty, I wouldn't say tedious process, but you definitely want to do your due diligence, and one adjustment on one side of the bed could have an impact on the other side of the bed. So you definitely want to just keep checking, go all the way around, go from middle out, and you're not looking for perfection. You're never going to get this bed plate perfect. It's not, at least to my understanding, it's not a machined um, piece of steel. It's just a flat piece of aluminum. So there's always going to be minor variations, uh, but you want it to be as close to perfect as you can get it. And based on my experience between the two Cobra 2 Maxes that I own, plus or minus 2.5 thousandths of an inch off of zero is about as good as you're going to get. So what that means is that as you're moving the dial indicator around on the bed, you're going to see that needle go maybe up 2.5 ticks and down 2.5 ticks off zero. And you should be able to get the middle two screws perfect, but then from that point forward, just shoot for that tolerance. And with that tolerance on both my machines, once the PEI plate's back installed, and if I put a straight edge on the bed, you'll see later that it is, to my eyes, perfectly flat, which is, if it's good enough for your eyes, it's going to be good enough for that first layer of filament, which is going to be, zero point 0.2 to zero point 0.3 millimeters thick. So just keep working it around and you'll get it good.
So now that we've leveled the bed, we could take a straight edge, and you can see that no matter where I place it on this bed, it is pretty daggone flat. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that not only is the bed flat, but that we're square to the bed on the gantry arms, and that we are parallel to the bed with the print head. What I've done here is I just put a flat straight edge on the bed, and I'm just manually moving it up and down, coming down on that straight edge, and I'm seeing that I'm getting even pressure parallel to my straight edge from the access to the bed. And that tells me that as the print head's moving back and forth, it's going to be even along the print head. So we're now perpendicular here on the gantry axes, and we're parallel here. So your prints should be level to the bed at this point.
Now we're going to put the print head back on, and then as soon as the print head's back on, what I would recommend doing is checking all the rollers.
So what I do is I adjust these cams so that you can't spin the cams by finger, at least not with a moderate amount of force, but that they're firm on the rail, because you don't want slop. You want it to roll smooth, but you don't want it to be tight and adding friction to the whole assembly. So do that for the print head, and also do it for both sides of the gantry. So there's one cam for each of these on the inside. And then also do the same thing underneath the print bed. There's 3 cams on each side of the print bed. Just make sure again that they're snug and in contact, but that they're not torqued down just to the point where you can't push the cam by finger, I think is a good tension.
Once the cams are adjusted, I'd recommend running a vibration compensation, and then we'll be ready to run auto leveling.
Okay, so the machine's fired up now. So now we're going to go into our tools, and we're going to go ahead and run auto leveling. And we'll come back and check on this when it's done. Since I've been using or manipulating this machine, I'm going to go ahead and squirt this thing down with rubbing alcohol. This is just 91% isopropyl. If you don't have a spray bottle like this laying around, I would buy one. This is a really good best practice. You wipe down the bed plate before every print. And so far, with both machines, I've not had a single issue with the first layer not sticking when doing this method. And I'm also not, I see sometimes on the forums people being super anal about whether you can, whether you can't touch the machine or touch the PEI plate. I've never really been shy about it. I know I've got alcohol. I know how well alcohol degreases. And if it ever really becomes an issue that alcohol can't solve, you can also use just Blue Dawn dish soap. Give it a good cleaning. That is a degreaser with nothing else added to it, and that should take care of the problem. The other thing I've got to do here real quick is I've got to load some filament. Okay, we're all loaded. I'm going to go ahead and get the test print started. Okay, so we see that the bed temp is about 55 degrees. It's set to 60, so as soon as that gets to 60, it's going to start rolling with this print. Now, I'm running a modified version of Start G code versus the included default Start G code that's in the Anycubic slicer and the profiles that Anycubic provides. What my Start G code is going to do differently is it's going to heat the print bed. It's going to wait for the print bed temperature, which is what it's currently doing. It's going to preheat the nozzle to 185 degrees, which is below the recommended melting threshold of PLA, which will get it warm but not hot. And then once the bed's hot, it will home. And homing is just the print bed, the print head, and the depth all going to their limits. So there's a limit switch on the print head that it just went to. There's a switch on the print bed that it went to. And now it's coming down on the PEI plate, and it's using the proximity sensor to see how close it is to the plate. And so now it knows its starting position, and it can follow the rest of the instructions. I apologize, I should have zoomed out. This portion is where you kind of want to keep your finger on the trigger, which is the power switch, though. In the event that you hear or see the nozzle gouging into the PEI plate, I would kill power. And if that were to occur, you have a couple of different options. You can either come into your menu here in Z offset, and you can raise that up before it starts. You have to initiate the next print, but before it actually starts moving, raise the Z offset up. And if it's gouging, I would probably start with at least 0.1 millimeters, if not 0.2. Or what I would recommend is, rather than using Z offset to solve that problem, I would actually lower the height of the proximity sensor so that auto leveling doesn't put it in a position where it's putting the print head into the bed. That's up to you. Again, and if you do adjust the proximity sensor, make sure you run auto leveling again, and then do the same test and the same result. Okay, so now here we're printing the initial print, and I can see, and I'm just going to go ahead and stop it right here. So I can see that it already drug filament across the bed on me, so which means that it's not low enough. The print head's not low enough. So we'll wait for it to do its thing, and I'll show you what I'm talking about here. Okay, so, and this was consistent on both printers now, that initially the print head is too high. So you can see the filament here. Instead of creating the square, it just didn't stick. And there's a couple corners here. This circle's not perfect. That circle's not even close. And so there's no point in continuing with this print. So I'm going to use a 3D printed scraper, and I'm going to quickly pull the filament off of the print bed, and it did not stick at all because it was too high. So now I'm going to go in to my menu here. I'm going to go into prints, recent, start this print again, and now I'm going to lower my Z offset. And because it pulled right off, I'm going to go with 0.1 down. and we'll see what that does. And again, I'm gonna keep my finger near the trigger of the on-off switch in the event that that's too low. Now, from my experience, if the PEI or the PLA is not adhering to the bed like that, you could pretty much go 0.2, even 0.25 without touching the print bed. But now I'm listening. I don't hear any scraping. That's good. And because we did this relatively quickly, it shouldn't take long for the nozzle to get back up to temperature. All right, so we're watching the first line here, and we're looking for a lack of sticktivity. So far, so good. Oh, there's a little corner that's not great. So that corner just wasn't great. I'm going to go down 0.05 again. And we'll let it keep running and see if I get any more nasty corners. Let's see. Once it's done the perimeters, you should see these lines, and I'm not sure you're going to see it in the camera here, but you should see these lines all connect. So right here. And if they're not connecting, once the perimeter's done, and it's not done right now, that also could be an indicator that your depth is either too high or too low. So we're letting it do its thing. You can see there's a few spots where it messed up, so we're not there yet. I think we're still too high. But I'll let it get through the first the filling of the first square, and I'll show you proof that you're either too high or too low. So this print, okay, yeah, definitely too high. So see how the lines in here, there's a clear gap between lines, and if you lift it off the print bed with light shining, and you can't really see it in the camera, but you would actually be able to see the PEI underneath. That is a print head being too high. Okay. If it was too low, you'll see that eventually here. But if it was too low, you wouldn't see any gaps in the lines, and you might actually see it looking mushed into the print bed. So what I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to lower the Z offset by 0.04, and I'm going to resume the print, and I'm going to see how this next square turns out. Now, you got to keep in mind also your print bed may not be perfectly level, and auto calibration may not have been perfectly working. So I'm going to see how this next square turns out, and then I'm going to terminate this print unless this next square is good. And if the next square is good, then I'll let it do one more square and see how it turns out. And you can see there's a little excess filament over there. That type of thing just happens. So we're still a little high, so you can see the string in separation. So I'm going to go ahead and lower the Z offset by 0.04 again. That's no rhyme or reason for why I'm choosing 0.04. I'm just choosing a number that feels not too big, not too small. And we'll see. That square looks a little bit better. It's still not good. I'm going to go 0.05. Down again. I'd rather get to the point where it's a little too low than too high. And like I said, from my experience so far, it looks like you can go about plus or minus 0.3, which makes sense. That's the thickness of the nozzle is 0.4 before you're going to get into trouble if you're too high. So that circle just completed, and it is still stringy looking, which means it's a little too high. So let's see what this one looks like when it's done. Okay, now that looks a lot better. So we'll stop the print here. And we'll go ahead and scrape this off. And as long as I'm not touching the print bed, I don't need to clean it. And the scraper is enabling me to pull that off without touching the print bed. So again, we'll just go from history, print again, and because everything's still warm, it should you're ready to go. Okay, finally getting it dialed in. So this is pretty much what you want right here. You want squares that have lines that are connecting, that there's no tear out, and that they're not too low. And when you look on the printables template page, you'll see examples of this also in higher definition. And this particular print bed is looking pretty damn even all the way across. So I think I'm gonna call this good. If you do have like one square versus another that's showing us either the filament's too deep or too high, but the majority of them look good, then just adjust the bed screws underneath of that square rather than trying to do anything else crazy. So yeah, so if the square, like say this square looked stringy and disconnected, again, that would mean the filament's too high, which means the bed needs to come up. So you back that screw out a little bit. And if this one particular square, for example, was too smushed, and it was like, you know, chopped up because the nozzle was too low, then you would want to tighten that one screw just a little bit. And I think about a quarter turn is probably where you want to start, maybe a quarter, half turn. But yeah, I think I'm gonna call this good. I don't think I'm gonna do any more adjustment. I did during this square lift it one more 0.01, and you can see that all the way across the bed we've got good consistent print. So bed leveling complete.